In today's video, I will be refuting every pro-choice argument, of which I have over 100 on my list. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with argument number 1. If a woman is raped, we should surround the woman with love, care, and support, and we should administer justice by having the state execute the rapist if he is found guilty after a fair trial. But we should not take one situation where there is a victim and create more victims. We should not answer the wicked and evil act of rape with the wicked and evil act of murdering the unborn child. What happens in rape is wrong because it's someone abusing another person's body against their will. And in the same way, abortion is also wrong because it involves a mother or an abortionist or both abusing the child against the child's will. Argument number 2, life of the mother / ectopic pregnancies. So it is possible that doctors may need to deliver the child weeks or months early as part of providing the best health care for the mother and the baby and trying to keep both patients alive and healthy. And this is what doctors should do. They should do everything they can to protect both lives while at no point intentionally killing either one. Now keep in mind that if the pregnant mother dies, obviously so does the child. Therefore, if in order to save the lives of both the mother and the baby, preterm delivery is pursued and results in the unfortunate and unintentional death of the child when all reasonable alternatives to save the life of the unborn child were attempted or none were available, then no one would be guilty of a criminal act if an equal protection bill had passed. Now keep in mind, no equal protection bills have passed in the United States so far, but I do think that one that is in particular a good bill to look at when analyzing things like life of the mother is the 2023 South Carolina Prenatal Equal Protection Act, which has a section in it that says medical care or treatment provided with the requisite consent by a licensed physician to avert the death of a pregnant woman that results in the accidental or unintentional injury or death of her unborn child when all reasonable alternatives to save the life of the unborn child were attempted or none were available does not constitute a violation of this article. So as you can see, even if a bill of equal protection was passed, women will still be able to get health care during their pregnancy and obviously throughout childbirth. All right, moving on to ectopic pregnancies. So I want to quickly refute the myth that women won't be able to get treatments for ectopic pregnancies if a bill of equal protection is passed. So keep in mind these bills are also sometimes called bills of abolition. So if you hear a bill of abolition, a bill of equal protection, pretty much referring to the same bills. But let's start by distinguishing between abortions and the treatments for ectopic pregnancies. So the most common method of abortion in 2020 in the United States was abortion by pills, or in other words, chemical abortion. The pills used in a chemical abortion are most commonly mifepristone and misoprostol. Keep in mind that neither of those pills are used to treat ectopic pregnancies. The most common surgical procedures for abortion in the United States are the D&E procedure and the D&C procedure. In a D&E abortion, the child is ripped apart limb by limb inside of the uterus and then extracted. In a D&C abortion, a suction catheter is inserted up a woman's uterus, and that suction catheter then rips that baby apart and extracts it through the tubes. When you see the picture of the cup with a bunch of blood and body parts in it, that's the D&C abortion. All right, now let's talk about the 3 options for treating ectopic pregnancy. So what we just talked about was the surgical and chemical abortions. Now we're transitioning into talking about how do you treat ectopic pregnancies. I want to make sure I make that distinction and you make that marker in your head because we're specifically talking about the differences between abortions and ectopic pregnancies. All right, so the first treatment option for ectopic pregnancies is called expectant management. You may also hear something called watchful waiting. Okay, and the way that this works is you monitor the situation and typically the child will dissolve on their own and no active intervention is necessary. The second treatment option for ectopic pregnancies is surgically removing the child from the woman's body. Now keep in mind, in the case of an ectopic pregnancy, the child has implanted somewhere other than the uterus and it's extremely unlikely the child will be able to survive until viability. Keep in mind, this is not considered an abortion because you're not intentionally killing the child. And this is very important because obviously, as I explained with the South Carolina Equal Protection Act and other bills of equal protection, there are sections that say, for example, and this is a direct quote, once again, medical care or treatment provided with the requisite consent by a licensed physician to avert the death of a pregnant woman that results in the accidental or unintentional injury or death of her unborn child when all reasonable alternatives to save the life of the unborn child were attempted or none were available does not constitute a violation of this article. So again, the key part you want to focus in on here is that results in the accidental or unintentional injury or death of her unborn child. So if it's medically necessary to remove the child from the woman's body using surgery in the case of an ectopic pregnancy to save the life of the mother, and obviously, once again, keep in mind, if mother dies, child dies, so the doctors are doing the best thing they can to save both lives here. Okay, as long as you're not intentionally killing the child, which you're not in the case of a surgical removal of an ectopic pregnancy, okay, that would not be considered an abortion, and that would still be allowed under bills of equal protection. Now, obviously, if we have the technology to allow that child to develop outside the woman's body after surgical removal, we should do so. But keep in mind, at this time, we don't have that technology, so the unfortunate consequence of averting the death of the pregnant woman is the unintentional death of her unborn child. But once again, that would not be a violation of an Equal Protection Act. All right, that brings us to the third option in treating ectopic pregnancies, which is in the injection of methotrexate into a woman's butt. Now, keep in mind that in 92.4% of cases of ectopic pregnancy, the child is already dead at the time of the diagnostic ultrasound. It's perfectly acceptable to use methotrexate injection to treat ectopic pregnancy if the child is already dead, which is true in the case of the majority of ectopic pregnancies. However, if the child is still living at the time of the diagnostic ultrasound, it would not be acceptable to kill the child through a methotrexate injection. Because keep in mind, the way methotrexate injections work is they intentionally restrict the child's cells from dividing, thus intentionally killing the child. That would obviously be unacceptable under a bill of equal protection, since that is in fact murder. Now, an obvious objection that someone may raise in the comments of this video is that methotrexate injections can also be used to cause abortions. And that's true. For example, in poor countries, instead of the abortion pills mifepristone and misoprostol, they'll sometimes use a methotrexate injection to cause an abortion, and obviously that's wrong, and that would be considered murder and not allowed under a bill of equal protection. Now, I want to point out, however, that I have no concerns that women who are getting methotrexate injections to treat an ectopic pregnancy in which the child is already dead at the time of the diagnostic ultrasound would be prosecuted if a bill of equal protection was passed. And the reason for that is when a woman goes in and gets a diagnostic ultrasound, they see it's an ectopic pregnancy and they see that the child is already dead. That's all going to be recorded by doctors in the context of a medical environment where doctors are doing everything they can to preserve both lives. So there's going to be documentation for that. And so if the woman does get the methotrexate injection and the child's already dead, she would not be getting prosecuted. And I have no concerns that there would be really any issues there, because that's all going to be recorded in medical records by doctors who are doing everything they can to preserve both lives. All right, that being said, let's go and move on to the third argument that I hear pro-choicers or people who are pro-abortion make, and that's that what if the child has birth defects or there's fetal abnormalities? Well, the obvious question here is, should we kill born people who have birth defects or abnormalities? And the answer is no. Okay, well, then why should we kill the unborn who have birth defects and fetal abnormalities? Okay, if the argument is that because someone is different from us or has some birth defect or fetal abnormality, therefore they can be killed, that applies equally as well to people outside of the womb. But obviously most pro-choicers and most people who are pro-abortion would say that we should care for people who have Down syndrome or spina bifida and not murder them when they're outside the womb. And also add on to that, 99% of people with Down syndrome are happy with their lives, and over 90% of people with spina bifida will live past 30. Argument number 4, what if a child will die of illness shortly after birth? Well, all of us are going to die at some point in our lives, but those of us who will die later should not have the right to take the lives of those who are predicted to die sooner. There's a bunch of people in hospitals right now who are predicted to only have a couple days left to live due to cancer or other illnesses, but that does not give us the right to murder them. Human beings should be protected from being murdered from conception until natural death. Argument number 5, the child is not conscious yet, or the child does not have the capacity for consciousness, or in other words, the equipment to have consciousness. So let's start with the first part of this argument, and that's that the child hasn't had any consciousness yet. Okay, so if someone is unconscious for a surgery, can you kill them? The answer is obviously no, right? So it must be something other than consciousness that gives someone a right to life. Now, some people will say, well, you can't kill the person who's unconscious for a surgery because they're going to be conscious again in the future. Well, that's true for the child in the womb as well. They're going to be conscious in the future as well. Now, sometimes you'll see a pro-choicer shift then and say, well, no, you can't kill the person who's unconscious for a surgery because they've had consciousness in the past. It doesn't matter that they'll have consciousness in the future. It doesn't matter that they're unconscious now. They've had consciousness in the past, and that's what makes them valuable. Well, for one, I think it's important to know that consciousness arises in children at 20 to 24 weeks gestation in the womb. So if you ask them, okay, well then are you against third trimester abortions? And they say, no, they're perfectly fine with third trimester abortions, then it's quite clear that their argument really isn't actually consciousness. It's probably something more like bodily autonomy or something like that. Now, I also need to point out here that consciousness in the past is completely arbitrary. Just like if someone says that having white skin is what makes humans valuable, okay? In the atheistic worldview, the white supremacists thought that skin color is what makes people valuable is a chemical reaction, just like the person who thinks that it's consciousness in the past is what makes us valuable. So the question to the atheists or the pro-choicers making this argument is, why are they calling one chemical reaction moral? Okay, in this case, they would be saying that it's moral to kill people who haven't had consciousness in the past, but then they call the other chemical reaction from the white supremacist immoral. They're both chemical reactions, right? If I shake up a bottle of Mountain Dew and a bottle of Diet Coke, right, and I pop the lids and they start fizzing, those are both chemical reactions. We wouldn't call one moral, we wouldn't call it one immoral. Okay, so the real question here is, how can an atheist even account for morality? And another follow-up you can ask someone you're talking to with this is, how could you know if you are wrong about what provides humans value, right? Given your worldview, your meaning the atheist, given the atheistic worldview, it would be impossible for you to think any other way, right? Given that your thought is a chemical reaction, which is based on the atoms, what the atoms in the brain do at these specific temperatures in this specific environment, given these certain conditions, they're not actually thinking, because there's no other way that they could be thinking, right? For example, in the same way, when I shake up a bottle of Mountain Dew and it fizzes, it couldn't do that any other way, given the temperatures and given its environment and given the atoms. It's the same thing for someone who's thinking, right? If they hold to the materialistic worldview, they couldn't actually think another way. Or in other words, they couldn't actually know if they're wrong given their premises. And they don't actually have a choice in the matter as far as what their thinking provides humans value. Now, another argument that you can make to someone who's saying that it's consciousness in the past that provides someone values, you can ask them, well, if someone gets in a car accident, has full and complete memory loss of their past consciousness, but will become conscious again in 5 months, can you murder them? Now, some people will say, yes, you can murder them. But then obviously at that point, they've violated their claim that past consciousness is what makes humans valuable, because they said, even though this person's had past conscious, they've lost all memory of that. And so, yeah, you can kill them. So at that point, they violated their claim. So now they're in the point of a logical contradiction. Now, they may say, no, you can't kill this person who is going to become conscious again. And the reason is they've had past consciousness, which at this point, they're at least being consistent. But the problem is now they're in kind of a bind, right? Because if they're saying that it's past consciousness that provides humans value, but then they're saying that the person who's had full memory loss of that past consciousness, you can't kill them. Well, the question is, why is it relevant, right? If they've lost all memory, then it's not really even about, consciousness being on a continuity, because there's no real continuity of identity at that point. There's no continuity of consciousness, right? So at this point, it kind of really shows them, hopefully, just how arbitrary they are being. Okay, and keep in mind, they're being just as arbitrary as someone who's saying skin color provides humans value. All right, now on to the second part of sort of this consciousness argument you will sometimes hear people make, and that's the capacity for consciousness, or in other words, the equipment for consciousness. So the way to think about this, right, is, you have certain body parts, right, parts of the brain that allow you to have consciousness. So that's kind of, if you think about that as being equipment, that's what they're referring to. If someone has the equipment for consciousness. So if you hear capacity for consciousness, you can kind of think equipment. All right. This is an argument that's essentially been popularized by the streamer Destiny, as far as I can tell. But yeah, this argument is also arbitrary, completely arbitrary, right? Why not say that we should only value humans with the capacity for sight? Why not say we should only value humans with the capacity for speech? Why not say we should only value humans with the capacity for hearing? Why are we saying that it's having the capacity for consciousness that provides humans valuable, right? Why not say the capacity for sight and say blind people, we can kill them? This is completely arbitrary again. Okay, now a typical response that you may hear from people who propose this argument is that most people value consciousness of other humans. Well, at that point, you can ask them, well, is morality determined by the majority? If they say yes, they have no ultimate objection to the slavery of the 1800s or to the Holocaust in Germany against the Jews, because they're just appealing to the majority consensus as what provides morality. Now, I'll also point out that human value is actually in direct contradiction to their premises if they are, in fact, an atheist and hold to a materialistic worldview. Now, I also want to point out, once again, you can ask the question, how could you know if you were wrong about what provides humans value? And the reason I like asking this question to atheists is because this kind of roots out the fact that what they're saying is merely an opinion, and they really can't know with any certainty what is moral, what is immoral, and what gives humans value, because in order to do so, in order to state how they could be wrong, they'd have to state some absolute standard of morality, which their worldview can't provide. Okay. Now, obviously, another question you can ask then is, given your atheistic worldview, why are you even acting like there's intrinsic value in humans at all? If you hold to the premise that the universe is cosmically purposeless, ungoverned, and without ultimate meaning, then how in the world can you say that humans have value? For example, if I take a teaspoon of water out from the ocean, there are certain adjectives that will apply to the ocean that will not apply to the teaspoon of ocean water, right? So we have this big ocean of water. We take a small portion of that. There are certain adjectives that apply to the big ocean that don't apply to the small portion, that small teaspoon. One of those aspects would be weight. We would say that the ocean is heavy, but that the teaspoon of ocean is actually light. Okay. Now, however, even though when we switch from the ocean, which is we can describe as heavy, right, because there's so much water in it, to the teaspoon, there are some things that change. There are also some things that don't change. Okay. For example, if I take that teaspoon of ocean water, it's still going to be composed of 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen for every water molecule contained inside of it, just like the ocean is. Additionally, both the ocean and the teaspoon of ocean have the natural capacity to make something wet, right? To make something saturated with water. Now, all this is to say that if you believe the universe is purposeless, unguided, and meaningless, then you must also believe the same thing about humanity. You can't say that the universe is meaningless, but that humans are meaningful. That does not follow. That'd be illogical and inconsistent. As an atheist, you've boarded the plane to nihilism and despair, and you don't get to hop off halfway to the destination. You don't get to borrow from the Christian worldview that humans are made in the image of God and that humans have value, dignity, and are worthy of love and respect. Okay, you've taken the flight, you've boarded it, you got to take it all the way to its intended destination, which is despair and nihilism. Because just like the ocean is made of 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen for every water molecule, and that's the same for the teaspoon of water I take out of the ocean, and just like the ocean can make something saturated with water, make something wet, so can that teaspoon. If we hold to the fact that the universe as a whole is purposeless, meaningless, and ultimately there's no divine justice ahead of us, well, then you have to apply that same thing to humanity, because by its very nature, the ocean is H2O. By its very nature, that teaspoon of ocean is H2O. By its very nature, the universe is unguided, purposeless, and meaningless. So is that small portion you call humanity. All right, moving on to bodily autonomy. This is argument number 6. Okay, so someone says, for example, well, I believe that humans have bodily autonomy, or I believe women have bodily autonomy, and therefore, abortion should be legal. It should be okay. Well, the obvious rebuttal to that is you believe in bodily autonomy? For which bodies? Shouldn't all bodies have bodily autonomy? If they say just women, well, shouldn't all women have bodily autonomy? Because over half of the women in the womb, or over half of the children in the womb who are being aborted are in fact women. So if you support bodily autonomy, then you should be fully against abortion, because what happens in abortion is a child's bodily autonomy is violated as he is murdered by his mother. Another way to rebut the bodily autonomy argument is just ask the person if they believe in neglect laws, because the basis for all neglect laws is that parents are required to use their bodies to provide a safe and healthy environment for their child to continue to develop inside of. If a parent says the child has no right to demand the use of my body and leaves a newborn alone in its bedroom and the child dies, the parent is charged with murder, because parents are required, morally required, and right now legally required, because at least that aspect of law for the most part hasn't gone to the craziness that the rest has, but obviously, parents are morally required to provide a safe and healthy environment for their child. When parents fail to do this, for example, by starving a child to death and leaving it in a closet, they get charged with murder. Okay, another question for someone who's making the bodily autonomy argument is, how do you even account for bodily autonomy as a meaningful concept apart from the Christian worldview? Right? And now keep in mind, the reason that I keep mentioning, the Christian worldview versus other worldviews is because this is ultimately a collision of worldviews. And if you think that you can just, live in this neutral zone, well, you have to reckon with the fact that neutral zones don't exist. And this is ultimately a collision of worldviews, and you have to bring that up because it's just the truth. And you can't allow atheists to borrow some capital from the Christian worldview without taking the whole thing. Christians are on a plane going this direction to its final destination. Atheists are going this direction to their final destination of nihilism and despair. You can't let them borrow capital. Both worldviews have to take it to the ultimate destination. All right, that being said, so like I said, the real question here is, how do you even account for bodily autonomy as a meaningful concept apart from Christianity? If you take the atheistic worldview that we are fundamentally stardust, our ancestors are bacteria, and that we evolved in a cosmically purposeless universe, then what could possibly be wrong with some matter bumping into other matter and violating that supposed bodily autonomy, right? The person I'm talking to, if they're an atheist, they're still alive today. So they've decided it's perfectly fine to violate the bodily autonomy of certain types of matter, whether that be plants or animals. And now they're arbitrarily saying that humans have bodily autonomy that we ought not violate. Well, the atheistic worldview can't account for bodily autonomy nor human value. Human value comes from the Christian worldview that humans are made in the image of God. And what does God say about abortion? He says it's child sacrifice, it's murder, and needs to be criminalized as murder. God says that children are a blessing from him, that parents should love their children, that murder should be criminalized. And given the atheistic worldview, what makes it morally wrong for a grouping of matter, right, an ugly bag of mostly water, which is us in the atheistic worldview, to violate the supposed autonomy of another group, an ugly bag of mostly water, right? I don't see atheists crying every time a rock rolls down a hill and splits a tree in half. Okay, that's violating the bodily autonomy of the tree, but there's no tears there. Okay, there's no tears there because they know deep down in their heart that humans are made in the image of God. And they have God's law written on their heart, which is why I do believe deep down they all know that abortion is in fact murder and that it's wrong, and that when women get abortions and when people support abortion, they're violating God's law. But they suppress that truth in their unrighteousness. And for more on that, you can look at Romans 1 verses 18 to 31. All right. Argument number 7, consenting to sex is not consenting to pregnancy. Well, that's obviously false. Consenting to sex is consenting to pregnancy. For example, if I buy a lottery ticket, I can't say I only consent to winning. I consent to winning and losing because I bought the ticket, and whether I win or lose is out of my control. In the same way, when you have sex, you are engaging in an activity where you could get pregnant or not get pregnant. Just as it would be absurd for someone with a losing lottery ticket to demand the billion-dollar jackpot, it's likewise absurd for a woman who got pregnant from consensual sex to demand that she gets to terminate her pregnancy, or in other words, murder her child, after she finds out she got pregnant. I also want to point out how wicked our culture is, given the fact that in the lottery analogy, our culture views getting pregnant as losing the lottery rather than winning. If we lived in a culture that loved God, we would view pregnancy as analogous to a winning ticket, not a losing one. Argument number 8 says that a child could end up in foster care. Well, there's around 400,000 children who are living in foster care in the United States right now. Should we murder them? And typically the pro-choicer or the person who's pro-abortion will say, no, we should reform the foster care system and we should care for them. And obviously, I agree with that. We should reform the foster care system and we should care for those children. But the question is, why? The question is, why should we care about these kids in foster care? And it's because those children are valuable, because they are made in the image of God and they deserve care. They deserve to be loved. They deserve to be respected, and they deserve to have a right to life that is guaranteed under law. And in the same way that we ought to care for those children who are in foster care, we ought to care for those children in the womb, because they're also made in the image of God. They're also human beings, and they deserve to be cared for, loved, and protected by law from being murdered. Okay, there's injustice in the foster care system, and there's no question about that. But whose worldview, again, can even support justice as a meaningful term and as something that ought to be aspired to? It's the Christian worldview, not an atheistic one. And injustice in one area of life, such as foster care, doesn't mean we should allow injustice in another area of life, being abortion. We should care for and love both the children who are in foster care and the children in the womb. Now, this leads into something that they will commonly ask, they being the pro-choicers. They may say, why don't you advocate for foster care reform instead of advocating for abortion to be criminalized or made illegal? Now, there are many injustices in the world today, but obviously if I try to fight every single wicked law and every injustice on the planet Earth, I'd be dividing my finite time by an infinite number of problems, which means I would make zero progress across the board. Now, typically when someone asks, someone who's against abortion this question of why don't you advocate for foster care reform instead, they don't actually hold this argument to areas of legislation or areas of injustice that they agree with. So a way that I respond to this is I ask them the question, is it wrong for the American Cancer Society to only focus on curing cancer? Typically, someone will reply saying, no, that's perfectly fine because they're the American Cancer Society and it's acceptable for them to focus on curing cancer. Awesome. I'm anti-abortion. I identify as someone who is anti-abortion. So it should be perfectly fine for me to focus on abolishing abortion and providing equal protection for all human life then, since that's what my focus is going to be on. Just like that person doesn't have any problem with the American Cancer Society focused on curing cancer, they shouldn't have any problem with me, someone who's an equal protectionist seeking to provide equal protection for all human beings in the United States. All right, argument number 9. You only care about kids before they're born, but not after. I care about all children, both born and the preborn, because they are all made in the image of God. Just because conservatives disagree with liberals on the best way to care for born children does not mean we do not care for them. We simply disagree on the best way to care for them. It's the Christian view that says all children deserve to be cared for, loved, regardless of age, size, level of development, degree of dependence, and location. Argument number 10. Help the kids who are here first. Well, an obvious question is, where is here? And if the child is not here, then why would the mother be seeking an abortion? Do you see the false premise in this argument? The person I'm talking to assumes that the child in the womb is not here, but they are here. And I don't hold to the view that humans are only valuable based on their location. For example, if someone said to you that they don't consider people in Venezuela here and that it should be okay to murder the people in Venezuela, I think you would recoil and say it is wrong to approve of the murder of innocent human beings based upon their location. But our wicked culture has indoctrinated us to view children in the womb as being in a location where it's acceptable to murder them. The child is already here and the pregnant woman is already a mother. The question now is, what kind of mother will she be? Will she be a mother who loves and cares for her child, or will she be a mother who murders her child? Argument number 11, mother's life is more important than the child's. So, and keep in mind when I say that, right, that's the pro-choicer stating that. So let me rephrase. Pro-choicer says the mother's life is more important than the child's. I respond saying, so you believe that some humans are more valuable than other humans? If so, I want to remind you that the Nazis and slave traders also believed some humans were more valuable than others, and I hope you can see the evils that clearly resulted in. As a Christian, I believe that all humans are equally valuable since they are made in the image of God. I'm curious as to why you, as an atheist, believe that the mother's life is valuable at all. Given your premises that we are made of stardust, the results of a big bang, and that our ancestors are bacteria, how do you justify value as a meaningful term? Moreover, how do you account for humans in particular having any more value than a rock or grass given your premises as a materialist? Argument number 12. The child could be abused in poverty and have a bad life. There are plenty of born children who are in poverty and in situations where they could be abused in the future, but the solution is not to abuse them to death by murdering them. Instead, we should remove the child from a potentially abusive situation and prosecute the abuser if any abuse has already taken place. There are a bunch of people who are living in poverty right now, and it should still be illegal to murder them. The solution to poverty is not killing the poor kids, it's helping improve their economic conditions. You don't help someone by murdering them. Argument number 13, abortion prevents or reduces crime. Is murder a crime? If so, you cannot say that abortion prevents crime, since every abortion is the murder of an innocent child. The argument that abortion reduces crime by killing preborn children who are likely to grow up to be criminals is equally applicable to born children, meaning that to be consistent, the pro-abort would also have to hold the position that it is acceptable to kill born children who are likely to grow up to be criminals. Argument number 14, we celebrate birthdays, not dates of conception. If our society decided to celebrate 6-month-old days instead of birthdays, would infanticide of 3-month-old born children be justified? Human life and human value is not predicated on what dates we decide to hold pizza parties or the date at which a child changes location from womb to room. Human life and human value originates at fertilization. Argument number 15, carpool lane/plane tickets. Human life and human value are not determined by how many plane tickets I need to buy or how many passengers in a carpool lane are counted. Or how the passengers in a carpool lane are counted. For example, if an airline decided that a husband's plane ticket allows his wife to ride the plane for free, then that wouldn't make it okay for the husband to kill his wife simply because he didn't need to pay for her airplane ticket. Another example is if the Texas state government declared that black people don't count as passengers in the carpool lane, that would not make it acceptable to genocide the black race. Argument number 16. According to the government, they aren't a child till after birth. This is not true. There have been cases where a mother is pregnant, wants the child, and the child is murdered by someone putting mifepristone or misoprostol or both in the mother's food or drink. When this happens, the perpetrator of the crime is charged with murder, which shows the government does in fact acknowledge that human life begins at fertilization. Right now, the government just provides special murder rights for mothers. Argument number 17. It's just a clump of cells. You're just a clump of cells, and we are all clumps of cells. It's wrong to murder human organisms, no matter how many cells they are composed of. Keep in mind, I said human organisms. That's a key part that you need to distinguish in what I just said. If you didn't get that distinction, then just go rewatch the last 30 seconds. Okay. Argument number 18. If the child is not wanted, so you think it's okay to murder unwanted children? What if a mother decides she no longer wants her 3-year-old? Can she kill her toddler? A child's value is not determined by whether they are wanted by their mother or not. All children are valuable and have a right to life because they are made in the image of God, and God commands us not to murder. Argument number 19. No heartbeat yet. People who receive heart transplants will not have a heart at a certain point in the procedure when a heart-lung bypass machine will be used. I assume you would be against murdering the individual receiving the transplant during the time in which they do not currently have a heart. The child in the womb does not need a heart to live until a certain stage of development. They are a living human being made in the image of God from the moment of fertilization and not from the moment at which they have a heart. A heartbeat is arbitrary, just like any other point than fertilization. And my response to the atheist would be, you have a chemical reaction in your brain that says a human heartbeat is what provides this value. The white supremacist has a chemical reaction in his brain that says white skin is what provides this value. Given your worldview where we live in a cosmically purposeless universe and decided from stardust and bacteria, why are you arbitrarily calling your chemical reaction moral and the white supremacists immoral? And how can you account for morality as a meaningful term in the first place, given your premises? Your worldview says that both thoughts are simply brain fizz. If I shake up a bottle of Mountain Dew and Diet Coke, you wouldn't call one moral and the other immoral. They are just fizzing. Argument number 20, life support/brain dead. People who are brain dead are legally dead because their bodies are no longer capable of acting in a coordinated manner such that the parts work for the good of the whole. This is why brain dead people's bodies decompose apart from life support. It may be ethical to keep a brain dead, aka dead, person's body on life support if they are on the organ donor list and their organs can be donated to someone in need. Keep in mind that such an individual will never have brain activity in the future, but the same cannot be said about the child in the womb. The line for death is not the same as the line for life. A child is human and living from fertilization. Now, keep in mind that the definition of brain dead would be an irreversible loss of all functions of the entire brain. A child in the womb doesn't have an irreversible loss of all functions of the entire brain, even though they don't have a brain yet. Okay, they don't have an irreversible loss of all brain function. So they are not, in fact, brain dead. So even if you consider people who are brain dead, which legally right now they are, and I would agree that someone who is brain dead is in fact dead because their parts no longer work for the good of the whole. That's different from the child in the womb. The child in the womb is not brain dead. They don't have an irreversible loss of all functions of the entire brain. And even from the moment of fertilization, when you have the zygote, which is a single cell, there is in fact still parts that work for the good of the whole. That's why we go from that zygote to eventually people like me and you, the person watching this video or the person I am talking to. In addition to that, as far as brain activity, which sometimes people will bring up, it's important to note that electrical activity starts in the brain of the child at 8 weeks development inside of the womb, and most people are okay with abortion beyond that. So that's their argument really isn't anything about brain activity. Typically, unless they're really willing to put the line at 8 weeks, but most pro-choicers aren't. They'll typically want to go usually at minimum like first trimester. But anyways, argument number 21, persistent vegetative state, otherwise known as PVS. PVS is different from brain dead. 10% to 24% of those with PVS go on to regain consciousness. We should care for them as people who are made in the image of God, not kill them. People in PVS have higher brain activity in response to hearing their own name. So if someone was in a persistent vegetative state and I said their name and then I said my name, we would note that there's higher brain activity going on when they hear their own name than mine or than someone else's. Okay, they're not in fact dead, not even close. Furthermore, if a family does decide to pull the plug on someone who's in PVS, what is killing them is whatever caused the PVS, such as a car accident, such as an illness. Usually it's typically going to be an accident, but for now, we'll just assume car accident. Okay, the family's deciding to let nature take its course, but that's different from what happens in abortion. In abortion, the family's not allowing nature to take its course, but rather intentionally killing the child. In the case of pulling the plug from someone on PVS, what's killing them is the car accident, not the pulling of the plug. All right, argument number, now keep in mind, I will just clarify this on my position with PVS. I don't think people should be pulling the plug on people with PVS because they're human beings made in the image of God, deserving of love, care, and respect. But obviously there is that distinction as far as what is actually killing them, right? What's killing them is the car accident, not pulling the plug. You're allowing nature to take its course in that situation, which I don't think you should be doing. I think you should be caring for them as someone made in the image of God. But obviously that is a distinction between, what goes on in the child in the womb. All right, argument number 22, babies don't have rights. Well, where do rights come from? If they say that it's the government or demos, and when I say demos, keep in mind that's referring to essentially the populace. Okay, so if they say that's the government or the populace that determines rights, then they have no real objection to the Holocaust or to slavery, since the government/demos can grant rights or take them away as the government or majority chooses. Argument number 23, an egg isn't a chicken. Well, I eat both, so what's the point? They're not human. God commanded us not to murder humans since humans are made in the image of God. Chickens and eggs are both fair game. So if you really want to have a conversation about abortion, then let's talk human development, not chicken and eggs, because I'm going to eat both of them. Argument number 24, you have to be pro-life for all life / you can't support the death penalty. No, I can support the death penalty and be anti-abortion because the child in the womb hasn't raped anyone, murdered anyone, or stolen any man or woman. We should protect innocent life, but the rapist, murderer, and manstealer are not innocent. Argument number 25, why aren't you vegan? Because humans are made in the image of God. Animals and plants are not made in the image of God and are thus fair game. Typically, this question is going to be asked by someone who's going to make a consciousness argument or pain argument next, so you can see those sections of this video for that. You must also, argument number 26, you must also support XYZ social welfare policy. No. Okay, and obviously, a great way to combat this is by asking, do you agree with laws against murdering born children? Typically, the person will say yes. Well, considering they support laws against murdering born children right now, despite the lack of XYZ welfare policy, then obviously the lack of those policies don't make it acceptable to murder the born children. So why would it make it acceptable to murder the preborn? Obviously, it has nothing to actually do with the welfare policies, right? Their argument is it has to be something else. Okay, so it would seem that ultimately, the argument has nothing to do with policies, has everything to do with where the child is located. Okay, so then you can obviously move on to whatever their next argument is, but clearly the social welfare policies have nothing to do with it. Argument number 27, you're pro-birth, not pro-life. Well, what do you mean by that? Okay, and typically they're going to relate this back to the welfare policies I just talked about. But obviously I'm anti-murder, right? Married couples should be fruitful and multiply since children are a blessing from the Lord, and unmarried people should not be engaging in sexual intercourse. Now, once a mother is pregnant, regardless of if she's wed or unwed or the circumstances of conception, I'm obviously going to be pro-birth for that child since the alternative is death. So do I consider myself pro-birth? Only in the context of marriage. Do I consider myself anti-murder? Yes. And then obviously if a mother is pregnant, even though she's unwed, I'm going to be pro-birth for the child inside of her because the alternative is death. Okay, the alternative is the murder of the child. All right, argument number 28. If a zygote is a human, so is a sperm. No, sperm by themselves are not human organisms. Eggs by themselves are not human organisms. However, once sperm fertilizes the egg, you now have a new unique human being made in the image of God. A zygote is the first cell of the new unique human being after fertilization takes place. Argument number 29, women won't be able to participate equally in society. Well, that's very misogynistic to say that women can't participate equally in society without the legal protection to murder their unborn children. I believe that women can participate equally in society without special murder rights. Men and women are equally valuable and they contribute to society in different ways during the 9 months of pregnancy. All right, argument number 30, why aren't you protesting Gaza or XYZ war instead of being anti-abortion? Now, the way I would respond to this is just by stating there are just wars and there are unjust wars. Just wars are morally acceptable. Unjust wars are not morally acceptable. Christians throughout the years have developed something called just war theory that we can use to determine if a war is just or unjust, but what does this have to do with the issue of abortion? And then they'll typically make another argument at which point you can address that. This is really just kind of an irrelevant point that they try to bring up. And also you can bring this back to what I mentioned earlier about saying that there's a ton of injustice around the world, right? There may be injustice in X, Y, and Z war, right? But we don't say that because there's injustice in one area, we allow for injustice in another area. And then obviously, if I try to split my finite time by the infinite number of problems and injustices in the world, then I make zero progress across the board. So it's actually smarter to focus on one or a couple of issues rather than trying to divide by infinity. All right, argument number 31. You want to control women's bodies. Well, laws against murder necessarily limit what we can do with our bodies as they don't allow us to use our bodies to intentionally kill another human being, right? Laws against men raping women control men's bodies. But I assume that people who are pro-abortion don't have any problem with laws against rape. right? So all law is an imposition of morality, and laws by their very nature control what we can do with our bodies. So to the extent that I want to control a woman's body to prevent her from murdering her unborn child, yes, I want to control her body. Do I want to control her body to say that she has to do Pilates or go play basketball or get a breast augmentation? No, I don't care about any of those things. But when it comes to the murder of an unborn child, I'm obviously going to be opposed to that because it's murder and God commands us not to murder. Okay, wherever the courtroom is, the courtroom's always telling, people what they can and can't do with their bodies, right? They're judging people for what they have done with their bodies to other people. All right, argument number 32, it's not a child. My rebuttal to this is that it is a child. The definition of a child is a young human being below the age of puberty or below the legal age of majority. I just got that from a quick Google search on the definition of child. Looks like it's from Oxford Languages. The second definition that I found from Oxford Languages was a son or daughter of any age. Under both of those definitions, the child in the womb would apply. Argument number 33, it's not a human. The way I would refute this is by stating from the moment of fertilization, the child is a human. You can ask the person you're talking to Google, when does human life begin scientifically? If they Google it on mobile, the first word up should be fertilization. At least that's what it's been in the past when I've asked them to do it. Obviously, human life does begin at fertilization. That's scientifically proven as well as biblical. You can see the book of Psalms for the biblical support for that, where it says that, David states that he was sinful from conception. You have Jeremiah stating that he was, knit together by God in his mother's womb. Obviously, you have the incarnation of Jesus, where where Mary meets with Elizabeth, right? Elizabeth says that John inside of her womb has leapt, right? John's job was to announce the presence of Jesus on earth. Obviously, at that point, Jesus was in the womb. So yes, clearly life begins at fertilization, both from a biblical perspective as well as scientific. Anyways, argument number 34. What if the woman who is pregnant is not ready to be a mother? Well, the woman is already a mother. The only question now is what kind of mother will she be? Will she be a mother who loves and cares for her child, or will she be the mother of a dead child that she murdered by abortion? Argument number 35, utilitarianism. Well, I'm not a utilitarianist. I'm a Christian. Given the atheistic worldview that says we live in a purposeless universe and are nothing more than stardust, matter in motion, why should anyone follow utilitarianism? Why not prioritize the greatest harm to the greatest number? After all, Ted Bundy's nervous system is not connected to his victims. So if he likes it, why shouldn't he rape and murder all those women that he did that to? Right? How is the greatest good for the greatest number to intentionally, and also a problem with utilitarianism is when people make this argument in regards to abortion is, how in the world is it the greatest good for the greatest number to intentionally murder innocent children, right? It does not follow. It doesn't even make sense there. Now, another problem just generally with utilitarianism that you can bring up is, how do you know every consequence of a given decision? It's impossible for you or even a computer model to perfectly compute a person's happiness, much less how happiness of every individual in society will be altered in the future by a decision in the present. Okay, so obviously there are plenty of problems with utilitarianism. In addition to that, an obvious question here is, to the utilitarianist, is why stop it in the womb? Why not kill the disabled, kill the elderly, and kill anyone else who's drawing more resources from society than they are contributing? If you're going to hold to utilitarianism, then be consistent and take it all the way down the line. Don't stop and try to borrow from the Christian worldview that humans have a right to life and say that we shouldn't kill the elderly because humans have a right to life, or we shouldn't kill the disabled because humans have a right to life. If you're going to hold to utilitarianism, take it all the way down the road and start advocating for killing people who are drawing more resources from society than they're contributing, because you got to take it all the way down the road then. Obviously, I'm against that. I'm against utilitarianism. I'm against killing people who are disabled, elderly, or who are drawing more resources from society than they are contributing, because I'm a Christian. God commands us not to murder, and God commands us to love our neighbor. Love does no harm to its neighbor. Argument number 36, overpopulation. Okay, this one is just a really stupid argument. Here's why. We don't have an overpopulation problem, nor are we likely to ever have one, because human ingenuity has historically outpaced population pressures. For proof of this, you can look at the Simon-Ehrlich wager. It was a bet in 1980 between economist Julian Simon and biologist Paul Ehrlich regarding resource scarcity. Ehrlich predicted a scarcity of 5 metals due to population growth, while Simon believed human ingenuity would mitigate the shortages. By 1990, Simon won as the price of metals fell, supporting his view. In addition to that, from 1960 to 2016, global real GDP per capita has increased faster than the world population. In addition to that, as population increases, we see the price of goods historically decreases because human ingenuity increases faster than scarcity from population pressure. And so here I actually have got a quote in my notes that I do want to read. I guess I will start by giving you the source for the quote to introduce it. So it's from Tupy and Pooley, 2020. Looks like the article is called Revisiting the Simon Ehrlich Wager 40 Years On. Looks like it was written in Human Progress, October 15, 2020. So here's the quote. Between 1980 and 2018, over those 38 years, the world's population rose from 4.458 billion to 7.631 billion, or 71.2%. Over the same period, basic commodities, including energy, food, materials, and metals, became 71.6% more affordable on average. For every 1% increase in population, in other words, resources become slightly more than 1% more abundant. Okay, so obviously we don't have an overpopulation problem. In fact, as our population grows, we find that goods actually get substantially cheaper, and we actually improve our quality of life. Argument number 37, it's basically states that it's not our place to judge, or that we shouldn't judge. Well, would you say the same thing about rapists, slave traders? What about people who murder the born people? Okay, in order to have any laws at all, we have to judge. In fact, in John 7, verse 24, it says, "Don't judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment." So we are actually commanded to judge, but, and there's a big but here, we need to judge with righteous judgment. So as long as we're judging with righteous judgment, we are in fact actually following what God says. Okay, in addition to that, in Leviticus 19:15, it states, "You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor show favoritism to the great, but you shall judge your neighbor in righteousness." So we are obviously commanded by Scripture to actually judge, but we are to judge in righteousness, not in unrighteousness. Argument number 38 states that morality is relative. Well, then why are you even talking to me, assuming I'm talking to an atheist or a pro-choicer or someone like that? Because you know that it's not true that morality is relative. You know that morality is absolute. Because a true and consistent moral relativist wouldn't even stop to talk to me. Okay, because he would know that it doesn't really matter. If morality is relative, then it can only be minimized to the point of moral nihilism, meaning it doesn't exist. And if someone actually believed in moral nihilism, they wouldn't stop to talk to me or anyone else about moral issues like this. If morality is truly relative, then there shouldn't be laws at all, since all morality would be relative to each individual, and we would have no business telling anyone else what to do. Now, some people may argue that a society can draw an arbitrary circle around themselves and define what's moral for them. But if morality is relative, then who says which circles qualify as being authoritative? How many people must collectively agree in order to allow it to be acceptable for them to punish those who disagree? It's arbitrary. Why can't the rapist draw a circle around himself and say that rape is a good, moral, happy thing for him and that his victims get no say? Okay, morality has to come from an ultimate that is above all the individuals and binding upon them in order to be meaningful. Now, some people will say it's wrong to cause pain, but says who? There's lots of people who like to inflict pain and their nervous system isn't connected to their victims. So if they can inflict pain and get pleasure from it, why shouldn't they, given an atheistic worldview where morality isn't really meaningful and where there's no ultimate justice ahead of them? Ted Bundy's nervous system is not connected to those women that he raped and murdered. So if he likes it and he gets pleasure from it and he can get away with it at the end of the day and there's no ultimate justice ahead of him, why shouldn't he do it? Okay, and then obviously, in addition to that, just a very simple response you can have here is if morality is relative, then you have no ultimate complaint against slavery, rape, the pedophilia, or the Holocaust. Argument number 39. Children who are hated or children who will grow up to be hated. The solution to children whose parents hate them is not murdering the child. It is loving and caring for the child. And even if the child's biological parents have hardened hearts and hate their child enough to want to murder them, that does not change the inherent value of the child. In such a situation, the child should be removed from the care of the biological parents who hate the child enough to want to kill them and placed in a home where they will be loved and cared for. Pro-abort's solution to an unloved child is murdering them. My solution to an unloved child is loving them. Love is a choice, and parents should choose to love their children. Argument number 40, God gave us the choice. No, God didn't give us the choice to murder anyone. In fact, he commanded us not to do it. Every day we have the choice to obey or disobey God. And abortion is a choice to not love God, to disobey God, and to not love your neighbor. Rapists choose to rape women. And when they do it, they are in violation of God's commands not to rape, which is why it is criminalized. Would pro-aborts seriously argue that because rapists are able to rape women, that it should be legal? Obviously, they would not argue that, or at least as far as I know, most of them would not argue that. All right, argument number 41, everything happens for a reason. Well, would you say that about rape, slavery, or the murder of born people? Why have laws at all if your position is that everything happens for a reason and that therefore murder shouldn't be against the law? Argument number 42, are you against what the voters want? When the voters want to murder innocent children, enslave black people, or murder Jews, I am proudly against what the voters want. If you believe that morality is determined by consensus, then you have no ultimate complaint against the Nazis or the slave traders of the 1700s. Morality is that which is pleasing to God, and immorality is that which is displeasing to God. Morality is not dependent upon what the voters want. Argument number 43, well, you'll lose every election if you are anti-abortion. Well, I would rather lose every election and stand on the law word of God that it's wrong to murder innocent children than win an election. For example, if I was alive during the Holocaust, I would really hope that I would be someone who would be willing to lose an election and stand against the murder of Jews rather than support the murder of Jews in order to win an election, in order to say lower taxes or something like that. All right, argument number 44. Argument number 44, women are coerced. Well, that's just not true. Less than 1% of women who are getting abortions cite the primary reason as being a husband or partner wants me to have an abortion, or parents want me to have an abortion. So let me just say that again more clearly. Less than 1% of women who are getting abortions cite the primary reason as being husband or partner wants me to have an abortion, or parents want me to have an abortion. And the source for that is the Guttmacher Institute. They had a study. It looks like the article is titled Reasons U.S. Women Have Abortions, Quantitative and Qualitative Perspectives. All right. In addition to that, if an equal protection bill were passed, then in the rare instance that a woman is forced to get an abortion by another person, such as a boyfriend, the person forcing the mother to get the abortion will be charged, not the mother. Keep in mind, this is already taken into account in current murder code under coercion. Argument number 45 states that women are victims of the abortion industry. No. Mothers who willfully take the lives of their innocent children by abortion are not victims, they're murderers, and they need to repent and seek forgiveness from God. Keep in mind, victims don't need to repent and seek forgiveness, but murderers do. That's why it's really important that we don't label women who willfully murder their children as victims. We need to rightfully label those who are in fact murderers and were not coerced, right, at the point of force or anything like that, but who willfully made the decision to take the life of the unborn child. We need to call them murderers because that's what God calls them. Okay, and they need to repent and seek forgiveness. Victims don't need to repent and seek forgiveness. Murderers do. Okay, now mothers who get abortions willfully do so with malice aforethought, or in other words, they think before getting the abortion, I do not want this child with me anymore. I want to end the life of this child, and then they get the abortions. They're doing it with malice aforethought. In addition to that, a 2011 study of over 15,000 visits by women to an urban abortion clinic found that, and now I'm going to begin, quote, patients opted to view the ultrasound image 42.5% of the time. Nearly all pregnancies, 98.8%, were terminated. 98.4% of pregnancies among women who viewed the ultrasound images, and 99% of pregnancies among the patients who did not. Among women with high decision certainty, viewing was not associated with deciding to continue the pregnancy. Viewing was significantly associated with deciding to continue the pregnancy only among the 7.4% of women who reported a medium or low decision certainty about having an abortion. And this is according to Gatter et al. From 2014. Now, the reason this statistic is important is because it shows that over 90% of women, even after viewing the ultrasound, will go on to get the abortion. Okay, so they're seeing their child and still deciding that they want to kill the child. All right. Now, even if you believe that some women don't know it's a human being inside of them, okay, the best way to tell them is with a bill of equal protection that tells them in law what's in their body is made in the image of God and is fully human from fertilization. So even if you hold to the view that, women actually don't know it's a human being, the best way to tell them would be with a bill of equal protection. All right, argument number 46. If I'm speaking with someone, they may say that I'm not qualified to speak on abortion because I'm not a doctor. Well, you're right. I'm not a doctor, but I'm also not a meteorologist, and I don't need to be a meteorologist to tell you when it's raining outside. And then in the same way, I don't need to be a doctor, a cop, or a judge to tell you that killing an innocent child in your body is murder and you're doing it with malice aforethought. Argument number 47, you're shaming women. Well, my message is that abortion is murder and that forgiveness for murder can be found in Jesus Christ alone. We all feel shame of our past sins, and it's healthy for us to feel that shame because it deters us from returning to our sin and points us to the cross where our debt was paid by Jesus Christ. So do people feel shame for their sins? Yes, including me. I also feel shame for my sins, and that shame is healthy. My message isn't intended to shame women. It's intended to tell them, hey, what you did is in fact murder. Forgiveness for murder, just like the forgiveness for all sins, including my sins, can be found in Jesus Christ alone. Argument number 48, it could be a tumor. A child in the mother's body is a human being / human organism. It is not a tumor. A tumor is not a human organism. A tumor is an abnormal growth of cells. A child is offspring, not an abnormal growth of cells. Argument number 49, abstinence is unrealistic. No, abstinence is very realistic. People were abstinent until marriage for much of American history. For example, I have a quote here. It says, in the United States, data for 1900, only 8% of women had experienced premarital sex by age 20, 14% by age 25, and still only 26% by age 30. So just over 100 years ago, it was actually common for women to not have premarital sex and to remain abstinent until marriage. Argument number 50, how does it affect you? Well, when my neighbors are being murdered by the millions, I think I should stand up for them. God commands us to love our neighbors. That includes all of our neighbors, including the preborn. Proverbs 24:11 says to rescue those being led away to death and hold back those staggering to the slaughter. Now, I'll point out, Southern plantation owners in the early 1800s in America said the same thing to the Northern abolitionists. They said, my property, my prerogative. This doesn't affect you. It's not your business. Stay out of it. But thank God for those Christians in the North who said, no, that's not your property. That's my neighbor. And God commands me to love them as myself. And they said that the wickedness of the chattel slave trade and of chattel slavery needed to end. Argument number 51, miscarriages. Okay, miscarriages don't justify abortion, just like tornadoes don't justify massacres. A miscarriage is a natural event, whereas an abortion is an intentional murder with malice aforethought. People die of natural causes like tornadoes, cancer, etc. all the time, but that in no way justifies intentional murder such as abortion, drive-by shootings, or massacres. Argument number 52, the child is a parasite. No, offspring are not parasites. Children are not parasites. Okay, parasites can't be the same species as their host. In addition to that, if pro-aborts think a child in the womb is a parasite because it requires resources from the mother, then they must view 15-year-old children as extra dangerous parasites in need of extermination, because those pesky 15-year-old parasites take up way more maternal resources than that little 9-month-old ones do in the womb. Argument number 53, pregnancy is traumatic. Okay, well, using your definition of trauma, your being, the pro-choicer or the pro-abort, so is raising a child for 18 years. Okay, but I don't think that you believe it's okay to murder toddlers, right? If they're saying pregnancy is traumatic because the child's using their body and, there's physical stress during childbirth, which no question, there is obviously physical stress during childbirth. Well, what do you think 18 years of raising a child is? Okay, that's also going to put a massive strain on your body. It's also going to require use of your resources, both bodily and financially. Okay, so if you're viewing pregnancy as traumatic, I think you also have to view the 18 years of raising the child as traumatic. And if your position is the trauma of pregnancy makes it okay to murder the child in the womb, then I think you also have to hold the position that the trauma of raising a child for 18 years makes it okay to murder your toddler. Argument number 54, temporary sterilization until government says you can have kids. No, it's not the government's job to tell me not to have kids, but it is the government's job to tell me not to murder kids. A child's life begins at fertilization and thus should be protected from fertilization. Argument number 55, you're oppressing women. No, I'm not oppressing any women. I simply want to make it illegal for everyone to murder anyone. Argument number 56, the child won't feel pain. Well, people with congenital insensitivity to pain can't feel pain. It's still wrong to murder them. In addition to that, you can harm someone without them ever being consciously aware of it. For example, if a woman goes unconscious for a surgery and is under complete anesthetic such that she will not feel anything or be aware of anything, it would be morally wrong for a doctor to rape her and then kill her, even though she wouldn't feel any pain and would never be aware of what was done to her. Argument number 57, why should the kid have to live? Your assumption here is that unless someone notifies you beforehand that they want to live, you can murder them. There's a bunch of people walking around right now who you haven't told explicitly, or who haven't told you explicitly that they want to live, but it would still be wrong for them to come and kill you. Additionally, even if a child told you that they didn't want to live, I would hope that you would not then say, well, if the child wants to die, I can make that happen. Rather, when anyone, whether child or adult, desires death, people should come alongside that individual and surround them with love, care, respect, and support to show them that life is worth living and that death is an enemy. For example, 1 Corinthians 15, 25 through 26 says, for he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be abolished is death. And this is a larger framing of the contrasting and the conflict between the Christian worldview and the atheistic one, is that the Christian worldview views death as an enemy, and the atheistic worldview, given its premises, simply cannot view death as an enemy. Argument number 58, abortion decreases suffering. Well, decreases suffering for who? Abortion certainly increases suffering for the babies that get murdered. Now, obviously, the pro-abort will say, well, it decreases suffering for the mother, but I would disagree with that. I don't believe that abortion decreases suffering for the mother, because the mother who murders her child by abortion has to live with the guilt of having murdered her child, which will certainly increase her suffering compared to the joy she would have received had she chosen to love and care for her child instead. Now, the pro-abort may then make basically a utilitarian argument in response to what I just said, in which case you can see the section I did on utilitarianism. Argument number 59, just address underlying causes. While there are many underlying causes for rape, theft, the murder of born people, and many other crimes, but the fact that there are underlying causes for them in no way would justify the decriminalization of those wicked acts. In the same way, there are many underlying causes for abortion, but that in no way justifies keeping abortion legal. Argument number 60, support comprehensive sex ed instead. Well, this is just a red herring, right? The question at hand is whether abortion should be criminalized, not what sex ed should include and where and when it should be taught, right? Is a lack of comprehensive sex ed justification for killing a born child? No. Then why would it be justification for killing an unborn child? Right? And in addition to that, if by comprehensive sex ed, the person I'm talking to means telling people that sex creates babies and that people should only be having sex inside of marriage, then sure, I agree. We should educate people that having sex creates babies and that people should only have sex inside of marriage. Cool. But if by comprehensive sex ed, they mean telling people to habitually violate God's commands regarding sexual ethics, then no, I don't support teaching people to sin against God and harm their own bodies, souls, and minds through sexual degeneracy. Now, everyone knows that when they have sex, they can get pregnant. I don't really think they need a class for that. If they do need a class for that, then parents aren't doing their jobs. And I would obviously prefer that parents just do their jobs and teach their kids that when you have sex, you can get pregnant and that you should wait to have sex till marriage. All right, argument number 61, you don't have a uterus. So basically this argument states that you don't have this trait of the perpetrator of the crime, so you can't oppose the crime. Well, if I'm speaking to a woman, well, you don't have a penis, but so you can't tell men not to rape then. Right? It's the same logic. It's saying you don't have this trait of the perpetrator. So in the case of rape, you don't have the penis, which the perpetrator has. So you can't tell the perpetrator not to commit the wicked and evil act on the victim. Now, obviously, I don't hold to that view. Okay, I don't hold to the view that someone can only condemn something if they have the trait of the perpetrator. Now, another way that this can be phrased is you don't have a plantation, so you can't tell plantation owners not to own slaves. Obviously, once again, I would disagree with that because I don't believe you need to have the trait of the perpetrator of the crime in order to oppose the crime. Okay, another way we've got continuing on with the arguments against sort of you don't have a uterus. Okay, I don't have to have a uterus to know that women murdering their unborn children is evil, just like you don't have to have a plantation to know that slavery is wrong, and you don't have to have a penis to know that men raping women is wrong. Okay, it's very sexist of the person I'm talking to judge the validity of my argument on the basis of my sex. If a woman is here saying the exact same thing as me, would she be right? If so, then again, that's very sexist of the person I'm talking to because they're judging the validity of an argument based on the sex of the person presenting it, which is pure sexism. Argument number 62, the child can't provide for itself, neither can a newborn or a toddler, but I assume you're against murdering toddlers. We all go in and out of degrees of dependence on other human beings our entire lives, but you don't believe that our degree of dependence is what makes us valuable and have a right to life, do you? The reason we are valuable is not because we are less dependent on other humans. It's because we are made in God's image, and we are made in his image from fertilization. Argument number 63. The child's not viable yet and can't survive without the help of the mother. Well, if the mother of a one-day-old child gets trapped in a cabin with no formula because of a snowstorm and she says, I will not breastfeed this child since it has no right to use my body and this child can die because I wish I would have aborted it anyways, and the child dies of starvation, should the mother be charged with murder? If the person I'm talking to says no, then they're justifying now the murder of infants. If they say yes, the woman should be charged with murder. Well, then they've refuted themselves since they acknowledge that mothers are morally obligated to use their body to provide resources and a safe and healthy environment for their child to continue to develop in. And if they have that obligation for children outside the womb, they also have that obligation for the child in the womb as well, which means that even if the child can't survive without the help of the mother, just like the child in the case of the snowstorm in the cabin, the mother's still obligated to provide that support. All right. In addition to that, once again, we all go in and out of degrees of dependence on other human beings our entire lives. But you don't believe that our degree of dependence is what makes us valuable and have a right to life, do you? Right? The reason we're valuable is because we're made in the image of God, not because of how independent or dependent we are on other human beings. Argument number 64, it should be the mother's choice because she will have to carry the child for 9 months. Well, should it be the mother's choice to murder her born child too? The mother will have to use her body to support her born child for 18 years. So shouldn't she also be able to murder her born child? Argument number 65. What about IVF and all the frozen embryos? IVF is evil, just like abortion. Children shouldn't be kept in freezers. Every child that is currently kept in a freezer should be protected by law from being murdered. And we should seek to help snowflake babies get adopted by loving parents. Argument 66. What about embryonic stem cell research? Yeah, we can't deliberately murder innocent children to benefit us. Some people may try to twist just war theory to say that it's acceptable if it results in the greatest good for the greatest number, but that's not consistent with just war theory or scripture. Just war theory developed by Christians outlaws the deliberate murder of innocents. Since the children in the embryonic state of development have no malice intent directed towards anyone and are fully human, it would be a gross twisting of just war theory to say that embryonic stem cell research is acceptable. It is not acceptable. It is murder. Argument number 67. God flooded the earth and commanded the Israelites to kill the Canaanites. God's the giver of life, and he has all authority to take life. We as humans, however, are not the givers of life, and God has commanded us not to murder, not to commit child sacrifice. Another argument you'll hear is the flood. While God has all authority to flood the earth and take the lives of wicked sinners who deserve death. However, it does not follow that we as sinful humans have the right to drown a baby in the bathtub because God flooded the earth. God sets the standards. We do not. We do not have the same authority that God does. As far as the Canaanites, it would have actually been immoral for the Israelites to disobey God when God commanded the Israelites to kill the Canaanites, since God is the standard of goodness. Morality is that which is in obedience to God and pleases God. Immorality is that which disobeys God and is displeasing to God. So if I'm talking to someone and they say that I need to condemn the Canaanites, or they launch the attack of, well, God flooded the earth, or, well, God killed the Canaanites, don't you find that wicked or horrendous? I say absolutely not. In fact, it would have been immoral for the Israelites to not kill the Canaanites because God had commanded them to do so, and God is the standard of goodness. See, when pro-choicers or pro-aborts or atheists sort of try to launch this attack of God killed the Canaanites, Canaanites, or God killed the Amalekites, or God flooded the earth. That's essentially a fastball high and inside that as a Christian, I'm perfectly happy to take. So they can go ahead and throw that fastball high and inside. Cool. God is the standard of morality. I have no issues with God commanding the slaughter of the Canaanites, no issues whatsoever, because he is the standard of goodness. It would have been immoral for the Israelites to disobey him since he's God, and that which is moral is that which is in obedience to God. Argument number 68. God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Well, this was prophecy for the coming of Christ, who is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Abraham had been promised that through Isaac his offspring would be named. Since God cannot lie, Abraham trusted that God would resurrect Isaac from the dead. God provided a ram as a substitute for Isaac, which prophesied of Jesus coming to take away the sins of the world and die the death that we deserve, such that all who die with him and are born again with him will no longer be in Adam, but in Christ and are reconciled to God. Okay, and then for anyone who wants some more information on that, there is a good article by Got Questions that I think is useful if you want to dive deeper into sort of the God telling Abraham to sacrifice Isaac story. So it's on Got Questions. I'll probably have the link in the video most likely. All right, argument number 69, scar on my stomach / changes to my body. While raising a child from birth to 18 years old causes significant changes to a mother's body and the father's too. So why can't they kill their newborn, toddler, or teenager? Since ultimately raising that child will change their body significantly. A single father or mother who works a blue-collar job to provide for their child will endure a lot of physical pain and bodily changes, but I assume you would not say that's a justification for them killing their born child or neglecting them to death by leaving them in a closet. Argument number 70, limited government / government should not tell me what to do. The role of civil government includes the protection of the right to life. The government already protects the lives of the born people from murder, and I am assuming you agree with that. Government should also protect the preborn, since all human beings are made in God's image. Civil government is to be a servant of God and avenger for wrath to him who does evil. Romans 13 verses 3 through 5 says, "For rulers are not a terror to the good work, but to the evil. Do you desire to have no fear of the authority? Do that which is good, and you will have praise from the authority. For he is a servant of God to you for good. But if you do that which is evil, be afraid, for he doesn't bear the sword in vain. For he is a servant of God and avenger for wrath to him who does evil. Therefore, you need to be in subjection, not only because of the wrath, but also for conscience sake. Argument number 71, you're criminalizing women. No, the bills of equal protection that I support are sex blind. If a man forces a mother to murder her preborn child by coercion, then the man will be charged with murder, not the mother. If a mother willingly murders her preborn child, then the mother will be charged with murder. When you say that I am criminalizing women, you are assuming that women as a sex are inherently unable to abstain from murder due exclusively to their biological sex. Argument number 72, what does America gain from banning abortion? We would glorify God by having just laws and reduce the amount of judgment that we are under as a nation due to our legalization of child sacrifice. Argument number 73, back alley / illegal abortions will kill women / abortions will still happen. I think it should be more dangerous for some people to murder others, not safer, and that's out of love for human life. For example, if someone was coming to murder you right now, I would want it to be more dangerous for them to do so, since it would act as a deterrent. In addition, even if it failed to act as a deterrent, I do support the death penalty for murderers. So if a woman did die in the process of murdering her unborn child, then that would simply expedite justice. Genesis 9:6 says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. Acts 25:11 says, for if I've done anything wrong and have committed anything worthy of death, I don't refuse to die. So that's from the New Testament, since people sometimes try to make the argument that because people basically try to just ask if there's evidence in the New Testament for the death penalty as well, and there's Acts 25:11, and then Romans 13:4 as well, for he's a servant of God to you for good, but if you do that which is evil, be afraid, for he doesn't bear the sword in vain. Sword is the instrument of death there, for he is a servant of God and avenger for wrath to him who does evil. In addition to that, as far as this idea that a bunch of women are going to die for illegal abortions, the data just doesn't bear that out. For example, 0.03% is the estimated fatality rate for illegal abortions in 1972, which was the year prior to Roe v. Wade. This is according to the Center for Disease Control. In 1972, 39 women died out of an estimated 130,000 illegal abortions. Okay, so obviously very, very low estimated fatality rate there from the CDC. All right, argument number 74. Children can be recreated. No, it is impossible to recreate the exact same child that was murdered by abortion. If your position is that children can be recreated and therefore abortion is moral, then to be consistent, you would have to be all right with the murder of anyone, since as long as a man or a woman are still alive on earth, they can be recreated. Argument number 75, abortion has a lower fatality rate than childbirth. Yes, it is true that abortion has a lower fatality rate for the mother than carrying the child to to term, but that does not justify abortion. It is safer for me to murder everyone else on the road to decrease the chances that I get in a car accident, but that does not make it moral, nor should it make it legal. For example, you are more likely to die from driving in Mississippi than from being pregnant in California. So if the logic is that it is acceptable to murder your child to decrease your chances of death from maternity, then it would also be acceptable for a driver in Mississippi to kill everyone else on the road to lower their chances of a fatal car accident. Another example. According to the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2022, the fatal work injury rate for logging workers is 100 per 100,000, which is roughly 10 times the maternal mortality rate for a pregnant woman in California. If a female logging worker was sick of having to risk her life at her job as a logging worker to provide for her toddler, it would not be acceptable for her to murder her child so she can take a job that is safer but doesn't pay enough to provide for her daughter. Another example, and this is probably the best example. A mother and her child are stranded on an island with a limited food supply, and there's a 0.01% chance that the mother will die from starvation before rescue if she has to share food with her child. But if she murders her child, then the chances that she dies decrease to 0.0004%. Would that make it morally acceptable for her to murder her child? The answer is obviously not. Now, another point I will make here, just as something to note, is that the amount of maternal deaths per 100,000 legal reported abortions in the U.S. between 2013 and 2020, according to the CDC, is 0.45 per 100,000. That's just something that you should be aware of. And then ultimately in the United States at large, not just California, but in the U.S. at large, the maternal mortality rate is 22.3 per 100,000. And then it's about 10 per 100,000 in California from 2018 to 2021. I just like knowing the number in California just because it's lower than I think most of the other states. So just as far as a sort of a minimum number there for the MMR, I think it's just useful to have in mind. All right, argument number 76, abortion is self-defense / self-preservation. Well, an obvious rebuttal to that would be, is your position that abortion should only be permissible for the health of the mother or for any reason the mother decides? Most people will say that it's for any reason that the mother decides, in which case the argument really has nothing to do with sort of health of the mother or self-defense or anything like that. Now, if they do say that it's only for health of the mother, then you can obviously see the section that I already went over covering life of the mother, ectopic pregnancies, and things like that. And then obviously if their position isn't that they're just, in this for life of the mother, they may say something like low income or something like that, in which case you can say, okay, so your position is kill the poor kids. How about kill the poor toddlers then? Because they're poor kids as well. So yeah, this idea that abortion is self-defense / self-preservation, I probably should have just kept it under life of the mother. But yeah, you can just see the section I already did in life of the mother for that one. Argument number 77. What about the kids whose mothers would go to jail for abortions? So it's important to note that 60% of mothers who are getting an abortion already have given birth at least once before. Consequently, were a bill of equal protection put in effect, there could be children whose mothers would lose custody of them if the mother violates the equal protection bill and chooses to murder the born child's sibling in the womb in the future. So it's important to note this isn't retroactive. It would be going forward. And obviously, right now, if a woman has two born children and she murders one of the born children, she's going to lose custody of the other child and, be prosecuted on murder. So likewise, if a mother intentionally murdered her preborn child and she already had a couple born kids, if a bill of equal protection was passed and then she did it after the bill was passed, breaking the law, then of course, it's quite likely that she would end up going to jail and then she would lose custody of those born children. But she should lose custody of those born children because ultimately we would not want her to be with children after she already murdered one of her children. Argument number 78, separation of church and state / don't impose your religious views on others. And it's important to note the separation of church and state is a term that was coined from Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptist Church, in which he argued that the church and the state should be separate entities. However, he did not argue that there should be a separation between God and state. Okay, it also doesn't mean that there should be a separation between morality and state. All laws are an imposition of morality, which raises the question, whose morality and why should we be able to prosecute people because of it? We have to keep in mind that the question of morality and God are linked, right? If God exists, then what he says is moral, okay? Now, if God does not exist, then morality is not a meaningful term at all, and you're reduced to moral nihilism and moral relativism, at which point there's no actual justification for why we should have laws at all. So to break this down very simply, we have one set here, okay? We know that morality and legislation are connected because we should legislate what is moral. And then over here we have, how do we know what is moral? We know what is moral from God. Therefore, God and legislation are absolutely have to be linked. Okay, so that being said, it's also important to note that if there is no God above the state, obviously then the state becomes God. And it's not whether we impose morality, but rather which morality we should impose. All right, argument number 79. It's a human being, but it's not a person. Who gets to decide who is a person and who is not? Can you think of times in history when all human beings were not considered to be people and what that led to? Because they said the same thing about blacks during the times of slavery and Jews during the times of the Holocaust. They said, that's not a person, that's a Jew. They said, that's not a person, that's a black man, I can enslave him. Okay, so obviously this idea of personhood has been used to lead to wickedness throughout human history. In addition to that, personhood is just an intellectually weak and dehumanizing term used by evil people to try to justify their wickedness against the group of humans they are seeking to oppress. Argument number 80, the Bible says life begins at first breath. No. Just because God breathed the breath of life into Adam's nostrils does not mean that life begins at first breath. Eve was made from Adam's rib, but that does not mean that all women are formed from ribs, nor does it mean that a female only becomes human once she has a rib. When God created Adam, there were no humans to sexually reproduce. Genesis 2:7 says, Yahweh God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Now, in addition to that, we can point out the verses that prove life begins at fertilization. Once again, keep in mind that there were no humans to sexually reproduce Adam, okay? Obviously, there would have had to been humans before Adam in order for Adam to be produced sexually, which is why we have Genesis 2:7 showing that God created Adam in this unique way. That does not therefore follow for those who are created from sexual reproduction. All right, so Psalms 139:13 through 17 state, For you formed my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. My soul knows that very well. My frame wasn't hidden from you when I was made in secret, woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my body. In your book they were all written, the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is their sum. Now we have Psalms 51 verse 5. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. That's the NIV version, Psalms 51:5. Pay attention to that last part. Sinful from the time my mother conceived me. So not only do we see the fact that human life begins at fertilization, but so does ensoulment. So even if someone was to try to argue that ensoulment doesn't happen until after birth, we can see clearly that that's not true. We see clearly both that ensoulment is from conception, and so is human life. Okay, we have Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. We have Luke 1:39-45. It says, Mary arose in those days and went into the hill country with haste into a city of Judah and entered into the house of Zacharias and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb. Keep in mind that the baby is John the Baptist, whose job it was to announce the earthly presence of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Okay, and it says, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. She called out with a loud voice and said, Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. Why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? Keep in mind there, mother of my Lord. In order to be a mother, you have to have a child with you. What is a child? It's a human being. Human life begins at fertilization. I'll continue on. For behold, when the voice of your greeting came into my ears, the baby leaped in my womb for joy. Okay, who leapt in the womb? The baby. Okay, what's a baby? A human baby. Okay, blessed is she who believed, for there will be a fulfillment of the things which have been spoken to her from the Lord. Another verse, Genesis 25:22, says the children struggled together within her. Okay, so once again, we see children. Children are human beings within her, okay, in her belly, in her womb. She said, if it is like this, why do I live? She went to inquire of Yahweh. Okay, so it's very, very clear that human life and ensoulment begins at fertilization. So no, the Bible does not say that life began at first breath, although life did begin for Adam, when God breathed the breath of life into him and man became a living soul. Okay, so just because Adam had the breath of life breathed into him does not mean that human life begins at first breath. It does not therefore follow. Argument number 81. We should allow people abortion. We should allow abortion for freedom of religion since some religions allow for abortion. No. The Aztecs practiced human sacrifice to the sun gods, but I'm assuming you would oppose that freedom of religion when they were ripping out the beating hearts of living human beings to sacrifice to the sun gods. So false religions have all sorts of immoral standards that should not be allowed to take place since they violate the commandments of the true and living God. Obviously, this raises the question of who is the true and living God, which obviously Christians would say is the triune God of the Holy Bible. Argument number 82. What if the woman can't afford to give birth? All right, so the response to this is that hospitals won't deny a pregnant woman care for childbirth. They're required to take care of the woman and the baby during childbirth, and they will bill insurance and or the mother afterwards. Therefore, the mother and the baby will in fact get the health care. However, if the mother can't afford the bill that she's likely to get after birth, that's not justification for her murdering the child in the womb, right? A child's value and right to life aren't dependent on the net worth or income of their parents. In this case, pro-aborts are arguing kill the poor kids, kill the children of those in poverty, which is obviously wrong and immoral. Argument 83, women don't want to get abortions. Then why are 3,000 happening a day in the United States? On some level, women obviously do want to get abortions, otherwise they would not be happening. Argument 84 says get a life / get a job. Basically, the way I would respond to this is just to say the sole purpose of my life isn't to get a job, but it's rather to glorify God. One of the ways I can glorify God is through obedience. God commands us to rescue those being led away to death in Proverbs 24:11. So I will seek to obey him by advocating for equal justice and equal protection for all those who bear his image. Now, obviously, it's good to provide for your family. It's good to have a job, good to, have a life. And I also want to point out, it's also good to, raise children, to worship God, seek the Lord. It's also good to fight things like sex trafficking. It's also good to fight things such as, wicked taxation laws and things like that. And I don't believe that someone has to fight specifically against abortion just because Proverbs 24:11 exists. Okay, we are ultimately the collective body of Christ. And obviously, if we try to fight against every single injustice, if one person tries to fight against every single injustice, then you run into the problem of finite time being divided by an infinite number of sins and problems in the world, in which case you would make no moral progress. Zero progress across the board, right? So this idea of get a life or get a job, or stop focusing on this, go focus on something else. Okay, it's important to recognize that we together are the body of Christ. Okay, abortion is just one area of injustice. It's perfectly acceptable for some people within the body of Christ to focus on fighting against that. It's also perfectly acceptable for some people in the body of Christ to focus on raising, 6 children, to fear and love the Lord. And when they do that, they are in fact fighting against the issue of child sacrifice and abortion, albeit indirectly. And in the same way, when someone fights against sex trafficking or unjust legislation, they're still serving God. So it's not a requirement to be a Christian that you have to be someone who goes to the abortion mills every week or goes to college campuses every month to talk to students about abortion. It's not a requirement whatsoever. Okay, our purpose in life is to glorify God, and we can do that in many ways. One of them is through, trying to rescue these children who are being murdered by abortion. Okay. But our chief purpose in life isn't to have a specific job. It's not, specifically to try to rescue all the children at abortion mills. It's to glorify God. And we can do that in a number of ways. So I want to make that very clear that we don't just glorify God by going to the abortion mills and trying to save children, going to campuses and trying to, change people's minds about abortion. We glorify God in many ways. And it's not a requirement that someone goes to the abortion mills to be a Christian, or it's not a requirement that you go to the abortion mills to try to rescue the children in order to glorify God. So I want to make that absolutely clear, because I think sometimes that gets missed by people who are anti-abortion, who are Christians. Argument number 85. Everybody here hates you. John 15, verses 18 to 20. If the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, since I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his Lord. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. Okay, I don't go to campuses and I don't talk to people about abortion because I want to be liked. I do it because I want to preach the gospel in the hope that by God's grace you may be saved through faith alone in Christ alone, to God's glory alone. Matthew 28, 18 to 20 says that Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Acts 17, verses 30 through 31 says, in the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commanded all people everywhere to repent, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. Okay, so when I go talk to people about these things, my purpose is to preach the gospel like it says in Acts, right? The command is to repent and believe. All right, and then we got 1 Corinthians 1, verse 18, for the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are dying, but to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God, right? So if I go to a campus and, people laugh at me or whatever as I'm trying to preach the gospel, remember 1 Corinthians 1:18, for the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are dying, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. Okay, and in addition to that, some people will say that I sound, and keep in mind, this is all in response to the argument of everybody here hates you or whatever, right? The truth sounds like hate to those who hate truth. All right, argument number 86. What if I don't care about my neighbor? Well, you should, because the God who created you and created all the wonderful blessings that you see around you commands you to, right? Acts 17, verse 31, once again, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. Matthew 25, verses 35 to 40, for I was hungry and you gave me food to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? When did we see you as a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? The king will answer them, most certainly I tell you, because you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. Okay, so as far as, what if I don't care about my neighbor? Clearly we are commanded in the gospel to care about our neighbor, including the least of these, including those in the womb. Argument number 87, do you support gun control? Well, that's irrelevant to the topic of the conversation. In addition to that, I'll point out a gun in the hands of a moral person is used to kill bad guys, not innocent babies. There is not an abortion in the world that does not end in the death of an innocent child. Argument number 88, rights are granted at different ages. Sometimes you might hear about the right to drive. Now, what's important to point out here is that regulations are not the same as rights. It's acceptable for a community to regulate things like waste disposal, traffic laws, and what age people can drive. It's not acceptable for a community to deprive someone of their right to life and make it legal to murder them. Okay, in Stephen Wolfe's book, The Case for Christian Nationalism, he defines Christian nationalism as a totality of national action consisting of civil laws and social customs conducted by a Christian nation as a Christian nation in order to procure for itself both earthly and heavenly good in Christ. End quote. In such a nation, there would obviously be laws against 3-year-olds driving Ford F-150s, since such a law procures both earthly and heavenly good in Christ by protecting people from reckless driving. Okay, in such a nation, abortion would be criminalized as murder, since that procures both earthly and heavenly good in Christ by obeying God's commands not to murder and not to commit child sacrifice. All right. Now, in addition to that, it's important to point out, where do rights come from, right? If they come from the government, you have no argument against slavery in the 1800s. And we kind of already covered that, so I'm going to just gloss over that for now, because we already covered rights, I believe. We already covered, right? So I'm just going to keep moving. Argument number 89, how about men ejaculate responsibly? Awesome. Amen. Men should not be having sex outside of marriage. I agree. But a father or mother's sexual sin does not justify the murder of an innocent child. Additionally, let's not pretend as though women play no role in sexual reproduction. In 99% of abortions, rape is not a contributing factor. Now, argument number 90, a 10-year-old who gets pregnant after rape. We should surround her with love, care, and support, but we should not repay the evil of rape with the murder of an innocent child. The state should give the rapist the death penalty, and the church, community, and family should care for her and the baby. And since she is young, pregnancy will likely be more dangerous for her compared to an adult. It is possible doctors may need to deliver the child weeks early as part of providing the best health care for the mother and baby and trying to keep both patients alive and healthy. And this is what doctors should do. They should do everything they can to protect both lives while at no point intentionally killing either one. Now, once again, keep in mind that if the pregnant mother dies, so does the child. So if in order to save both the lives of the young mother and the baby, preterm delivery is pursued and results in the unintentional and unfortunate death of the child, when all reasonable alternatives to save the life of the unborn child were attempted or none were available, no one would be guilty of a criminal act under a bill of equal protection were one to pass. You can see the 2023 South Carolina Equal Protection Act, Prenatal Equal Protection Act, for more information on that. Argument number 91. It's a human, but it's not a fully developed human. Humans aren't fully developed till 25. I don't think we should be able to kill people till 25. Do you? Argument number 92. Judaism says you can get abortions. So this is not the Orthodox Jewish position, actually. Nowhere in the Torah suggests this. Now, keep in mind the Tanakh itself includes Psalms and Jeremiah, which both show that life begins at conception. The Torah also includes Exodus 21, which assigns the same value to the life of the unborn as the born. Even the life of the mother exception that some Jews hold to for abortion isn't necessary. You can see the section I did on life of the mother for that. In addition to that, Judaism teaches that in the case of the life of the mother, it would be acceptable because the child is tantamount to a rodef, or in other words, one who is pursuing another to murder him or her. But obviously that's not the case. The child has no intent to harm the mother, and the child's mere existence and continued development is what may result in the mother's early death. This pregnancy is not analogous to a murderer trying to kill the mother, but rather to a situation where the mother and her born child are both stranded on an island with a limited food supply available before a rescue can be attempted. Sure, the child's mere existence may result in the mother and child dying sooner, pre-rescue attempt, rather than later due to the food supply being split up between the two, but that in no way would justify murdering the child, since there is no malice directed towards the mother by the child. In such a situation, it would be a violation of God's law for the mother to intentionally murder the child so that she doesn't run out of food and can be rescued. Now, while some people may try to refute this by citing just war theory, that is a misapplication, specifically because there is no harmful intent on the part of the child, and the situation is simply a consequence of the child's existence, not any action or decision on the child's behalf. Now, thankfully, even the plane crash situation is not analogous to abortion, and you can see the section I did on life of the mother for that as well. Argument number 93, I wish I was aborted / I tried to kill myself. This is an argument that will sometimes come up. It's really just unrelated, but if someone says that they wish they were aborted, I would typically say, in the most polite and kindest way and respectful way that I can say this, clearly you don't actually believe that you wish you were aborted since you're still here. Some people also say, I tried to kill myself. And again, when people are saying these things, you have to respond with love, care, kindness, and respect. If someone said that, I would say, I'm glad you were not successful. Since you are made in the image of God, you have value, dignity, and worth. And then another thing here. So some people will say, when they make this argument, they're saying, I tried to kill myself, or I wish I was aborted, therefore it follows that I should be able to kill my child. Well, in that case, it's basically their position is if a mother predicts her child will commit suicide, that she can murder them. I don't think that we should help people who are likely to commit suicide by helping them commit suicide. I think that we should actually help people who are likely to commit suicide by showing them that they have value, meaning, and purpose. I don't think we should help them kill themselves, and I don't think we should murder them in the womb as some sort of predetermined judgment that they're going to kill themselves anyway. I think that that's very flawed logic. I think instead we should care for people, show them they have value, meaning, and purpose. Argument number 94, banning abortion will cause disproportionately more black mothers to die giving birth. So this is largely true because black women get disproportionately more abortions and have higher maternal mortality rates, in no small part because they are disproportionately overweight compared to the general population of women. Now, I'm not saying this is any form of hatred. I'm just stating these things as states of fact. Now, black women are obviously made in the image of God. I love them as myself. These are just true facts surrounding why this is the case, and I feel like it's necessary to explain because that's in response to the argument that's being made. So I have to respond that way. Now, in addition to that, I'll point out criminalizing the murder of born people causes disproportionately more black men to go to jail than white men. But I obviously would still support that law that says it's wrong to murder born people. Okay. And the reason, again, that there's a disproportion there is because more black men on average are committing murder in proportion to the amount of black people in the population than white men. Argument number 95, abortion is a human right. You believe in human rights? For which humans? Does the human in the womb have a right to life? Where do you get rights without God? All right, so people will claim abortion is a human right. Where do they get this idea of rights without God? We already covered that. Argument number 96, if it's in my body, I get to do what I want with it. Well, if someone puts a prematurely born baby in their mouth, can they do what they want with it and eat it? Now, the pro-abort may respond, well, they put it there. Well, so do 99% of women who are getting pregnant. And then argument number 2 here that I would respond with is, well, if the argument is if it's in my body, I can do what I want with it, then a woman who's engaged in consensual sex, can she suddenly chop off a man's wiener because it's in her body? I think the answer is obviously no. Now, can she say that she wants to stop having sex and, stop having sex? Yes, right? But in the absence of her saying like stop or indicating that she wants to stop, she can't just suddenly chop off the man's body part that's in her body, obviously. Now, of course, she can say stop and the man must stop, but in the absence of her saying stop, and if she had engaged in consensual sex, she can't just randomly chop off a man's wiener, right? She'd have to say stop, and obviously the man would have to stop. Otherwise, it's rape, and my position is rapists should get the death penalty. So now we've got this argument of if it's in my body, I should get to do what I want with it. Says who, right? What's your ultimate standard of morality? Yourself? Who says that if it's in your body, you get to do what you want with it? What's the standard? It's just personal preference. It's arbitrary. Argument number 97. Basically, this is Exodus 21 verses 22 to 24. It's essentially a misinterpretation of the text as the people who try to use this as an argument. So I'll read the text out loud. It says, if men fight and hurt a pregnant woman so that she gives birth prematurely, and yet no harm follows, he shall surely be fined as much as the woman's husband demands and the judges allow. But if any harm follows, then you must take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. All right, so if there is no harm, then the man is fined, since giving birth prematurely is harder on the mother. However, if there is harm to the baby or the mother, then punishment is life for life, eye for eye, and so on. This shows that the child has just as much value and protection under law as every born person, including the mother. Far from justifying abortion, this passage clearly indicates that abortion is murder. The Hebrew is her child come out, which is indicating premature birth, not miscarriage. And the Greek is the child to go out, indicating premature birth, not miscarriage. And then there's a couple helpful articles on this as well. There's one from End Abortion Now called What Does the Bible Say About Abortion? There's another one from Answers in Genesis. It looks like it says Sanctity of Life /Abortion / Does the Bible Condone Abortion? Argument number 98, organ donation / blood donation. In the case where a child needs an organ or blood donation, what is killing them is not the lack of the donation, but some other thing, whether it be a car accident, disease, or birth defect. But in an abortion, the child is not dying from a lack of an organ donation. They are dying from being starved to death, dismembered, or ripped apart by suction. If a mother stopped caring for her 3-month-old born child because she claims the child has no right to use her body and her organs, then when the child dies of starvation, we would all agree that is murder. And such should it be the same for the child in the womb, since parents are morally obligated to provide a safe and healthy environment for their children to develop in. Argument number 99, the violinist. So the classic case of the violinist is that there is a world famous violinist who gets sick and he has some toxins in his blood that he needs to have get filtered out. And so they plug him into you and you have to use your kidneys to filter out sort of the toxins for 9 months. And you might have to be like on bed rest while you do it or something. So that's a classic case of the violinist. Here's why it's not analogous to pregnancy. For one difference is the parts of the body, right? Your uterus is not for you, whereas your kidney, you could argue that your kidney is, but your uterus is obviously designed to provide a safe and healthy environment for your child to develop inside of. Now, obviously, the child in the womb is essentially using more parts of your body than the uterus. I fully acknowledge that. I have no problem with that, specifically because of the relationship, which brings us into the next point. Okay, there's a difference in relationship between me and a random violinist and me and my child, or a pregnant mother and her child, right? The basis of all neglect laws is that parents are required to use their bodies to provide a safe and healthy environment for their child. Now, if someone fails to provide a safe and healthy environment for their child, they get charged with neglect. And if the child dies due to, willful neglect, that could be classified as murder as well, right? So parents are morally obligated to provide that safe and healthy environment for their child. Another example of this is women who are pregnant, right? They're not allowed to take drugs like Accutane or other drugs that can cause harm to the child in the utero because parents are responsible for providing a safe and healthy environment for their child. In addition to that, I'm not obligated to use my body to provide a safe and healthy environment for a random stranger, but I am required to do so for my offspring. Okay, another difference between the violinist and pregnancy is extraordinary versus ordinary care and natural versus unnatural. The case of an adult human violinist being plugged into me for 9 months is a case of extraordinary and unnatural care, whereas pregnancy is ordinary and natural care. In addition to that, where you even get the idea of bodily autonomy without God, right? As a Christian, I can say humans are made in the image of God and that violating someone's bodily autonomy through rape, assault, etc. is immoral and against the law of God. You, however, as an atheist, have no ultimate support for bodily autonomy. Now, as far as the question of would I support the violinist for 9 months, the answer is yes, because I'm commanded by God to love my neighbor as myself. Why would most people say that they would unplug themselves from the violinist, thus killing the violinist? Because they are in rebellion against God and say, no, God, I will not love you and I will not love my neighbor. Argument number 100, corpses have more rights than mothers. When people say this, they're basically saying that you can't take the organs from someone who is dead unless they've already signed off on that before. Now, I'll point out for 99% of women who get pregnant, they signed off on that before when they consented to have sex. But let's just say that, let's change this argument then to corpses have more rights than mothers who have been raped, and that's the circumstances of their conception. Well, once again, you have to acknowledge that there's something unique about a parent-child relationship in which parents are morally obligated to provide a safe and healthy environment for their child. That's the basis for all neglect laws. Argument number 101, women will be jailed for miscarriage. No, miscarriage is a natural occurrence. It is not the same as abortion. Abortion is murdering a child with malice aforethought. A miscarriage is natural. Just like in any murder investigation, there must be reasonable suspicion, right, in order to even start the investigation. And then there would have to be due process and a burden of proof. The prosecution would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant murdered her child and that it wasn't natural. Additionally, there's a bunch of stuff that we can do to, make sure that we're not getting these things wrong, obviously. So one example is Poland. They're a very pro-life country. They have a national pregnancy database. They have biological specimen tests for misoprostol, which is one of the drugs used for chemical abortions. So it tests for misoprostol in the placenta and in the fetal liver. For mifepristone, you can test the maternal blood. Poland does not charge women for taking the pills, just as a note, but it is a crime to help someone get the pills. Just thought I'd note that since we are mentioning Poland here. Some women have been prosecuted for miscarriages in the United States already. And when I say miscarriages, let me actually rephrase that. Some women have been prosecuted for miscarriages in the U.S. already. And for the most part, I actually agree with the decision to prosecute this. Now, in the few cases I have seen of this, okay, so I don't agree that women should be charged with miscarriages when it is in fact natural. But when you see headlines like women have been prosecuted for miscarriages in the U.S., here's what they're talking about. And I do support these few instances that I have seen of that. Not necessarily every instance, but there are some instances that I do support. So typically when you hear about this, it's cases where a pregnant mother has potentially taken lethal amounts, lethal to the baby, not necessarily the mother, but lethal to the baby amounts of hardcore drugs like meth. And while it can be difficult to determine with 100% certainty if it was the meth or other drugs or something else that caused the stillbirth or miscarriage, I do support law enforcement investigating these cases when they have reasonable suspicion that the miscarriage or stillbirth was not natural. Now, each case should be evaluated individually with the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. Typically, the charge wouldn't be murder. It'd be something like manslaughter or the distribution of drugs to a minor, since it's hard to actually prove intent in the case of a mother ingesting drugs. Now, if a pregnant mother takes mass amounts of meth, gives birth to a stillborn child, and doctors believe meth was beyond a reasonable doubt to have been the cause of death for the child, then I obviously would support manslaughter charges there. I would also support murder charges if there is sufficient evidence that she took the drugs with the intent to murder the child. So that's my position there. And it's also something to note that when you see these headlines where it says women are being prosecuted for miscarriages, it's important to note what they really mean by miscarriages, because typically they don't actually mean natural. Typically they mean something like the woman took insane amounts of meth and then the child died as a result of that, or is highly likely to have been the cause of death for the child. All right, argument number 102, abortion is healthcare. If I take someone to a sterile environment, knock them unconscious, put them under anesthetic, and then dismember them or starve them to death, that is not caring for them, that is murdering them. It is not healthcare. All right, argument number 103, I only have to do things I consent to / I only have to do things that make me happy. Unless the mother was raped, she did consent to motherhood when she consented to sex. Even in the case of rape, the mother has a moral obligation to provide a safe and healthy environment for her child to continue to develop inside of. Moral obligations exist despite our consent / willingness to accept the obligations. Argument number 104, they go to heaven anyways. Well, so should we legalize murdering Christians? Right? If the position is it's okay to murder people who will go to heaven, then should it be legal to murder all the Christians? Obviously not. So this is a really dumb argument. Where does the concept of heaven even come from? Christianity. What does God say about abortion? That it should be criminalized as murder. So that's a very bad argument on their part. Argument 105, you can remove someone off your property. Well, if a child is in his mother's house, she cannot murder the child simply because the child is in her property. This is because parents are obligated to provide a safe and healthy environment for the child to continue to develop inside of. So even if you hold the position that the uterus is the woman's property, well, if a woman has a house, she can't kill a child in her house. In the same way, she can't kill a child that's in her body either, just because it's removing someone from her property, quote unquote. Obviously, that's a fallacious argument. Argument 106, citizenship for unborn children conceived in America. Okay, so this is basically the argument that children who are born in America get citizenship, but children who are conceived in America do not get citizenship. Okay, so here's my position on that. The way I would generally respond to this is, do you think it should be legal to kill people who are not citizens, right? So tourists coming from, like, say, Buenos Aires to America, they're not American citizens. It should still be illegal to murder them, right? And most pro-choicers would obviously agree with that, right? So this idea of, whether someone's a citizen or not, that doesn't actually determine a right for life, obviously. Right, someone's citizenship isn't what makes them valuable. It's because they're made in the image of God. In addition to that, as far as my position on, birthright citizenship, things like that, I don't believe someone should get citizenship simply because they were born or conceived in America. My position is that the only automatic citizenship should be for children who have at least one parent who is an American citizen. So I actually don't believe that just because someone was born in America in present day that they should have citizenship. I think it should be based on if they have at least one parent who's an American citizen. All right, argument 107, child support begins after birth. Okay, here's how I would refute that. Child support is not dependent on when the government decides child support payments are required. If the government decided child support isn't required until a child is 5 years old, it would not make it okay to kill toddlers. In addition to that, if paternity tests and child support did not exist, it would not make it acceptable to murder children, since a child's value does not come from the first child support payment date. Argument number 108, it's illegal, so it's okay. So if it's legal, it's moral. Slavery was legal at one point. Did that make it okay? The Holocaust was, technically, I think that it was still illegal to murder Jews, but that was obviously ignored by the German government. And obviously, if it had been legal to murder the Jews, it wouldn't have made it okay. So another thing you can respond to this with is, I guess just kind of more points on this would be, if there is no God above the state, then the state becomes God. We obviously saw that in Nazi Germany. And if the populace can give rights and take away rights, and if the state is God, then you don't get to complain about slavery, the Holocaust, or segregation. You also don't get to complain if the populace decides to take abortion rights away. Argument number 109, Exodus 22 verses 29. Exodus 22, verse 29. Pro-aborts try to misread Exodus 22:29 to say that God required child sacrifice of the Israelites' firstborn. This is a misread of the text when read in its proper context, namely having read Exodus 13, verses 13 to 15, Numbers 3, verses 46 to 51, and Deuteronomy 12, verses 29 to 32. It becomes clear that the firstborn males of the Israelites were to be redeemed by a monetary sacrifice, not actually killed. This is extremely clear in Deuteronomy 12, verses 31, which says, You shall not do so to Yahweh your God, for every abomination to Yahweh which he hates, they have done to their gods, for they even burn their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods. Okay, so very, very clear there that God actually does not want the Israelites to kill their firstborn sons. Instead, they were to be redeemed by a monetary sacrifice. Okay, another one we got here, Exodus 22, verse 29. You shall not delay to offer from your harvest, and from the outflow of your presses you shall give me the firstborn of your sons. So that's the verse that people are usually referring to. Okay, and then here's sort of the rest of the verses for context that show it's very, very clearly actually to be a monetary sacrifice and not actually, killing the child. Okay, so here we have, for the redemption of the 273 of the firstborn of the children of Israel who exceed the number of the Levites, you shall take 5 shekels apiece for each one. According to the shekel of the sanctuary, you shall take them. The shekel is 20 garas. And you shall give the money with which their remainder is redeemed to Aaron and to his sons. Moses took the redemption money from those who exceeded the number of those who were redeemed by the Levites. From the firstborn of the children of Israel, he took the money, 1,365 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. And Moses gave the redemption money to Aaron and to his sons, according to Yahweh's word, as Yahweh commanded Moses. Here's Exodus 13 through 15. Every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, and if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And you shall redeem all the firstborn of man among your sons. It shall be when your son asks in time to come, saying, what is this? That you shall tell him, by strength of hand Yahweh brought us out from Egypt and from the house of bondage. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let go, Yahweh killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of livestock. Therefore I sacrifice to Yahweh all that opens the womb, being males, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. Deuteronomy 12:29-32. When Yahweh your God cuts off the nations from before you, where you go in to dispossess them, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, be careful that you are not ensnared to follow them after they are destroyed from before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? I will do likewise. You shall not do so to Yahweh your God, for every abomination to Yahweh which he hates they have done to their gods, for they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. Whatever thing I command you, that you shall observe to do. You shall not add to it nor take away from it. And then Jeremiah 19:5. They have built the high places of Baal to burn their children in the fire as offerings to Baal, something I did not command or mention, nor did it enter my mind. So obviously, very, very clearly, what's happening in Exodus 22, verse 29 is not that God is commanding the Israelites to kill their firstborn, but rather that they are to redeem them with a monetary sacrifice. Argument number 110, Ezekiel 20, verses 25-26. Okay, God handed the Israelites over to their sinful desires, similar to how he gives up unbelievers over to their sinful desires in Romans 1, verses 24-32. If you read through the entirety of Ezekiel 20, it's clear that God gave them rules that led to life, but that the Israelites rebelled and did not follow God's commands. Consequently, we see in Ezekiel 20, verse 25, that God hands them over to their sin as a result of their rebellion. Ezekiel 20, verse 25 in the New Living Translation says, I gave them over to worthless decrees and regulations that would not lead to life. Similarly, the New King James Version says, therefore I also gave them up to statutes that were not good and judgments by which they could not live. It is clear in proper context that God's laws were in fact just good and led to life. It was the Israelites' continued rebellion against God that led to God giving them up to what their hearts desired, which is very similar to Romans 1, verses 24-32. All right, now we've got, let me just scroll through this. Argument number 111, which is Numbers 5, verses 11-31. Only a couple translations view this as miscarriage. The rest, the vast majority, view it as a disfigurement of the woman. Neither the miscarriage or the disfigurement view justify abortion, however, and here's why. So if you take the disfigurement view of this passage, it would state that if the woman is not pregnant and her body becomes disfigured as described by the majority of translations, then obviously this would have nothing to do with abortion. It becomes irrelevant to abortion. Now, if you do take the miscarriage view of that passage, then if the woman is pregnant and the verses are describing a miscarriage, then once again, it's also irrelevant to abortion. And the reason is it's clear from the passage that God is the one who's causing the miscarriage, not the priest, not the mother, not the father, not the husband. Okay, God's the giver and taker of life and has all authority to do so when he chooses. God flooded the earth, which killed many people. It does not follow we can drown people in water or murder people. Okay, we're not God, but do you notice that in our sinful state, you see people try to use what God does as an excuse to justify their sin? When they do this, they make themselves God in their sinful suppression of the truth. Okay, God makes the rules that we are to obey as sinful creatures that he created. He does not have to follow the rules he gives to us as his creatures, since he is not a creature, but rather the creator of all things. Okay, now in addition to that, there's an application here of children conceived in, let me rephrase that. Some pro-choicers will try to take this passage and also apply it to children conceived in rape, adultery, and premarital sex. Okay, so some people try to make the argument that since the child is being punished for the adultery of the mother and father, that it is therefore follows that it's acceptable to punish preborn children to death for the sins of their parents. Okay, and keep in mind, this is specifically if you take the miscarriage view of the passage, which I don't, but some people do, it still would not follow that it's okay to punish children for the crimes of their fathers, and here is why. Okay, God makes it clear that children are not to be punished for the crimes of their fathers. For example, Deuteronomy 24:16 states that the fathers shall not be put to death for their children, neither shall the children be put to death for their fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. While it is true that God has at times commanded the death for children of parents who have sinned against him, for example, 2 Samuel 12:14, Joshua 7:25, Numbers 16:32, it does not follow that we get to make those same punishments on the children of guilty parents, since God explicitly says that we are not to punish children for the crimes of their fathers/mothers. Okay, so as you can see, both given what I just said as well as what I was saying previously about miscarriages, the biggest mistake people who are reading this passage and taking the miscarriage view make is when they try to draw a parallel to abortion and they refuse to see the difference between what God is allowed to do and what we are allowed to do. Instead, people who are pro-abortion ignore the creator-creature distinction and they make themselves God, giving themselves the power to do whatsoever their sinful hearts desire. So essentially they make themselves God, say, God did this, therefore I get to do this. That's what people are trying to do with Numbers 5:11 through 31 here. Okay, so they take a look at Numbers 5:11 through 31, see that God has the authority to take life if they take the miscarriage view, and then think they therefore do. Obviously, that's not the case. God had all authority to flood the earth. It doesn't mean that we get to drown newborns in bathtubs. Matthew 7 verses 1 is the argument number 112 is Matthew 7:1. The rebuttal to this is literally just Matthew 7 verses 2 to 3. So Matthew 7:1 through 3 says, don't judge so that you won't be judged, for with whatever judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with whatever measure you measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but don't consider the beam that is in your own eye? So when you actually take a look at the second and third verse here, it's very clear when you put it in context that it's speaking against hypocritical judgment and partiality towards oneself. Okay, now where an equal protection bill passed, it would show no partiality and would apply equally to men and women. Therefore, there is no hypocrisy in judging coming from equal protectionists on this. Okay, in addition to that, John 7:24 makes it clear we're to judge with righteous judgment. And also, the person who's saying we shouldn't judge, they don't hold this view for the rapist, the slave trader, or the pedophile, or the murderer of born people. Okay, so they're perfectly fine with judging. They just don't like the standard of judgment that is being proposed by equal protectionists here. Argument number 113, throw the first stone / John 8:7. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a doozy of an explanation, but Mosaic law required that there be at least 2 witnesses and that both the man and the woman would need to be put to death for the crime of adultery. It also required that the witnesses be the first to cast the stones. In situation described in John 8:7, it would appear that the witnesses and the man were not present, a clear indication that the standards for determining a conviction were not being upheld. Instead of pursuing justice with impartiality, the Pharisees' hearts were set on testing Jesus. In essence, Jesus decided not to condemn someone who was not being given a fair trial. This was consistent with Mosaic law, not a violation of it. Okay, next argument is Psalm 137 verse 9. It says, happy shall be he who takes and dashes your little ones against the rock. Okay, now this is an imprecatory psalm that references Isaiah 13:16, which states their infants will also be dashed in pieces before their eyes, their houses will be ransacked, and their wives raped. Isaiah 13:16 is Isaiah's prophecy from the Lord on how Babylon will be destroyed by an international army. Keep in mind the Babylonians had done such wicked acts to other nations already. The destruction of the Babylonians is God's judgment upon them. Isaiah 13 verse 6 says, wail, for Yahweh's day is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Now keep in mind that those who carry out the attack on Babylon will also have to answer to God for their actions. It's important to remember that attacks with such graphic scenes were common in war at the time. Now keep in mind that in war times, it is common for people to pray for, sing for, and call for their enemies to be defeated. One of the ways enemies can be defeated is through physical destruction. The other way this can happen is for an enemy to become a friend. Think Saul's conversion to Paul. Now when people call for one country to defeat another invading or aggressing country, they understand that there will unfortunately be bloodshed of innocent people as a result, even in the case of a just war. Such is the reality of the cost of war. When the Israelites are singing the psalm, they understand the way that their enemies will fall because of Isaiah's prophecy. Therefore, their song makes sense given that they have already been revealed the way in which Babylon will fall. And were they to sing any differently, they would be engaging in lying or not trusting God, since Isaiah had already been revealed by God the way in which Babylon will fall. Argument 115. If you believe abortion is murder, then why are you nonviolent? Because Romans 13 and 14 show that the sword belongs to the government, not to individuals or tribes. Therefore, vigilante violence against abortionists or against post-abortive mothers is sinful and is not permitted by Scripture. In fact, violence against abortionists and violence against post-abortive women is explicitly condemned by Scripture because individuals and tribes do not bear the sword. Only the government bears the sword. Individuals and tribes do not. Therefore, there should be zero violence going against abortionists and going against post-abortive mothers. Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, be sure to hit the subscribe button and drop a comment.